Hi, my name's Bill All, and I'm co-chair of the AgriWatch project of the Community Alliance for Global Justice. And there's a bunch of literature on the tables about our organization, about Grassroots International, and we're the solution. So you can get more detailed information as you go out if you haven't already. So just thank you, everybody, for coming tonight on a Saturday night on what looks to be actually almost a real spring evening. I want to thank the Newfield Foundation for bringing Fatou Bata here, and the Grassroots International for working with her and doing such great work on the ground in many places. And Community Alliance for Global Justice, as many of you know, got formed in the wake of the WTO festivities as an attempt. That's what I call them. It wasn't just a battle, it was a festival, right? A lot of us came together. You know, if you'll be able to see better if there's room over this side, because we're going to be showing slides and stuff, but feel free to sit there if you want to continue. So anyway, we got started mainly doing global justice and fair trade work, and we soon realized that that was important work, but the work of food sovereignty and food justice in this country and internationally was also key. And we started organizing around strengthening local economies everywhere. And many of you have come to our dinners, which are really kick-ass in the summer. Do we have a date yet? June 11th. Okay. Just checking. Anyway, in which 300 to 400 people come together and celebrate food sovereignty and food justice in the United States and around the world. So one of the projects that we've been working on for the last 3 years or so is AgriWatch, taking a look at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation's role and the Rockefeller Foundation's role in promoting what we consider to be bad agricultural practices in Africa, bad politics in Africa and in the United States. And we figured since we're in Seattle, we should take on the largest, or second largest foundation in the world, it turns out. Does anybody know what the largest foundation in the world is? IKEA. IKEA is the largest foundation in the world. That's a lot of furniture. So, but Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the largest family foundation and has amassed a large fortune between their money and the money that other mega millionaires, billionaires have given to them. And they do good work in certain areas, and we feel like they need to be challenged, especially for this work in particular. But in every sector, in global health, in education, and in agriculture, we really need to pay attention to how they're spending their money, how they're influencing policy on every level, from little NGOs and nonprofits to regional organizations to the federal government and international organizations. They're playing a role in global governance on every level, and in also impacting media by giving money to various media organizations, including NPR, the Columbia and Berkeley schools of journalism, and so on. So they really need watching. And I'll say a little bit more about our thinking about that later on. But we'd like to welcome 3 other people to the floor tonight to speak. Fatou Bata, who's with We Are the Solution and the African Food Sovereignty Alliance. Has come from Burkina Faso to speak with us tonight. And now I'm really sorry. I do get nervous even though I pretend like I don't. Marcia, I forgot your last name. Yeah. Yeah. Marcia E.T. Yeah, and we've met many times before. And Marcia works with Pesticide Action Network and does amazing organizing work on many issues that impact agriculture, food sovereignty, and justice around the world. And also Sarah Mersha, who I just met tonight with Grassroots International, and she'll tell us a little bit about her work in the organization. We'd also like to recognize Steve Brescia, who's the international coordinator for Groundswell International, who's also been integrally involved in the work. So without further ado, I'm going to give the mic to Fatou, who, as you might have noticed, has a little laryngitis tonight.
Hello to everybody. I just want to apologize for my voice. I hope, despite that, I could express the ideas here. And if there is something not very clear, please just let me know. I will come back to it. Thanks for your patience with me. In 2008, there was a food crisis that shook many countries, including Burkina Faso. Burkina Faso is a Sahelian country in West Africa, and it's one of the poorest countries in the world. And the food crisis in 2008 has really created some demonstration, mass demonstrations, to get leaders to think about the food problems. But why that? In fact, at that time in 2008, 2009, the agricultural production in Burkina was more than enough to feed the Burkinabe. But still, many areas in the north of the country, people even cannot have 1 meal a day. So the problem of the food crisis is not only the question of food availability, it's touch also the accessibility. Who can have access to food? Even if it is available in the country, not everybody can have it for many reasons. So when addressing the food problems, it's important to look at what are the other factors that affect the food availability, the food accessibility, and what prevent people from feeding themselves. So we have also some of these, the economic crisis that may get people not have enough money to buy food. There are also some other activity like the climate, the effect of the climate change that also affect the food production and even the utilization. There are also the loss of local seed varieties. So there are so many factors that we might have to think about, to look at those factors and see how can we address them. So what I will say is to talk about food production in how are we addressing it. There are perhaps two ways. One is perhaps the sustainable way to produce enough food, but the second is also to just use all the resources at once, and then there is no future for the generation to come. With Groundswell International, we decide to go through the sustainable process of producing food. And in that aspect, in the case of Burkina, women play a major role in food production. They are in the farm of a family almost for the whole day to help produce the food for the family. In fact, studies just show that women produce more than 80% of farming activities, and yet they have no right or no control over the food stock in the family. But they are the one who play the major role. They are the one who carry the task, the responsibility, the weeding, the plowing, and the harvesting, but at the end, there is no way to access to the food unless the head of the household, the man, decide to give a quantity for the family for one day. But what will she do the rest of the time? She has to feed her children, especially when we are in the situation of polygamous family. Every woman has to take care of her children. That means, in addition to working in the family farm, she has to farm her own farm and have something to store and feed the children. Otherwise, it would be difficult for herself and the children she has. That's the reality. And what type of farm she has to cultivate? You have a picture back here. Usually, the type of land they have is degraded land, which cannot really produce. And this is given, lending to them on purpose. Usually the men will select where the land is not good at all, to say this is where you can farm. Of course, she will not get anything, not much, from that land, because she doesn't have equipment, she doesn't have a training, she doesn't have the input, the manure, all this that can improve the soil and get her to harvest something for her and her children. But yet, they are central to feed not only the family, but the elders in the family, and also take care of the health. If someone is sick, she has to take from what her produce to be able to buy medicine or to buy the drug for healing these people. So women are struggling to be able to meet all these responsibilities, all these household responsibilities. So what they can do, because they cannot produce enough in their degraded land, they have to develop other initiatives, especially trying to find coping mechanism so that she still can meet her children's food need in the family. And what she will do is to go in the bush to collect leaves, to collect fruit, to collect roots. That would be something she can use, especially during one time of the year the food is really, there is a shortage. And that time is also the time she has to work on the farm. We call that period the lean season, that's the hunger period, because their production will barely feed them for 12 months, from one harvest to another harvest. So they have to cope between, it depends on the year, perhaps 6 months, perhaps more than 6 months, it depends. That lady you see on the picture, her production when she starts farming that degraded land lasts perhaps 5 months, 5 to 6 months only. But how about the rest of the year? She still have to find a way to feed the family. And that's why they have to develop other mechanisms trying to use natural resources so that they can feed the family. So what happened with the trend we have been seeing through the Green Revolution? That Green Revolution idea has been introduced In fact, it has been uncovered through the food crisis in our context. In fact, it was there before, but it was hidden. It has been introduced, but the African farmers, their organization even don't know about it, at least for the case of Burkina and some of the country in the Sahel. So talking about Agra, I heard it when I was in Canada. But in Burkina, I didn't hear about what is Agra, what they are doing, nothing. So when some of the activists, African activists, civil society movement, try to understand it better, then they call upon several meetings to say there is no way that we talk about Agra, green revolution in Africa, and the African farmers are even not aware of it. There is a need to bring it to Africa and explain it to people. So this is where we start, and perhaps just that has been supported by the meeting in Mali, Nieleni, the Food Sovereignty Forum. So based on that also, all these organizations that attend the Nieleni Forum on food sovereignty, they decide that there is a necessity for the African farmers organization to sit and decide and see, understand first what is Agra about, what do they want to do, and what's the impact on their lives, and then what are the alternatives to suggest or to propose. Because we do have techniques, we do have capacity to make the production system resilient. This is why, through ages, the African farmers has been able to feed themselves. If there haven't been this policy from outside that distort what's happening in the country. So the group met in July in Bamako, Mali, to discuss what would be the alternative to a green revolution. And we decided that for 3 years, it's important to undertake a global campaign to explain what is Agra, what do they want to do, and what are our alternatives based on African farmers' knowledge and expertise, to say this is what can be done and this is what is appropriate for our environment. So, finally, this campaign is supposed to start in 2009 and supported by the network of peasant farmer organization in West Africa, ROPA. I don't know if some of you have heard about ROPA. ROPA is supposed to conduct it, and it was supposed to be something that will be launched in Burkina, but it has to be at the continent level. East Africa, West Africa, Central Africa, South Africa, North Africa, everywhere, farmers' organization has to get mobilized to just try to say to these people, to our leaders first, because they are the one who negotiate with Agra, to tell them this is what we can do from our own resources, from our own knowledge. It's important to listen to us before you introduce things that we even don't know where it will lead us. For different reasons, the campaign did not take place in 2009. But in the meantime, platform organization, African platform peasant organization met in East Africa to set up the Alliance for Food Sovereignty, AFSA, in Africa. And also along this, we say usually women, rural women, have no information about what's going on. We have seen they are the main player in the food production chain, but they don't have any information, any training. Just why? Perhaps just the majority are not literate. They are busy with all the activities, and also the men just ignore that these people also need the information. Not only men, but also the development organization, agency. They don't just pay sufficient attention to women needs and priorities. So for this campaign, we decided that it's important, even if there is a global campaign, that we define a specific campaign that would target rural women farmers. And in that meeting in Bamako, at least 12 rural women organizations were there. And we decided to sit down and think about what's the impact of Agra on women's life. One of the things is, we say, because of the monoculture and destroying the biodiversity, women are losing their livelihood. I just mentioned that when it is hard, the women have to go to the forest or to the bush to collect fruit, to collect roots, to collect leaves, and through that, they can feed their family. And also they can sell some to get some in cash. But because of the land is the agra and that issue of land grabbing, because it's part of the problem. Women are losing all this. And they noticed 2 years ago, there was a forum in Burkina which gathered women and farmers from everywhere. And they say, this is what happened today. We have no more some of the species. We are just living on. I have few of the name, like shea nut tree. Some, even if some may not know the shea nut tree, but at least shea nut butter that we may find in some of the cookies or whatever, chocolate. These trees are disappearing. And it's, in fact, that tree is the bank for women. They use everything from that. And because it is destroyed, they just have nothing more. There is other species too that disappear in that eastern part of Burkina due to this monocropping, this cotton, genetically modified cotton, and all of these things that some of you may know is here. So we think that that specific campaign for women would help them. voice their concern, voice their priority, and get the politician and also the leaders listen a bit to them. So what has been decided, at least for that campaign targeting women, is to be able to document women's traditional knowledge about food production that can be spread, that can be shared among all the farmers at the continent level. Also to encourage the development of agricultural research, because researchers are not always listening to farmers. They do some research, yes, but it's not applicable in the farm. It's just sit somewhere. So now what is important through this campaign is to have a researcher listen to farmers and to get farmers involved in the protocol of the research, so that what will come out will be useful for the farmers and their families. What needs to be mentioned, in fact, for a generation, farmers has been researchers too. They try things, they assess it, and they decide to expand it or not. So it's just get our intellectual, as we said in French, to think about these people. They think they are just illiterate, they don't know anything. In fact, they know many. And we can learn from them. And we can build on what they have done for many, many years and generations. Another aspect is to increase training for women, to help them learn the techniques. Of course, they do some the agroecology, but there are other techniques to train them on how to apply these techniques so that they can improve their production. Another way is market. I mentioned the food may be available somewhere, but not accessible. Not accessible financially, but also not accessible geographically, because of there is no connection with the market, or to have at least some good price, or perhaps the roads are not good so that they can transfer food from one area to another area. And we think women play a big role in making food available on the market by connecting a small market. If you visit the market in this part of the world, women are central in the area of food distribution, the staple and all these things, transformation, processing, and distribution. So market is important also to help women connect or learn how they can link up together and get organized so that that aspect of market be useful to them. Two other points is the literacy. It's a big problem, especially, I was saying, Burkina, more than 70 people are illiterate and in rural area. And women made of more than 90% from statistics. So for that, it's important to develop literacy classes so that they can improve and be able to exchange with other groups and write down what they have. And literacy is in their local language, not in French or English. Another aspect is to access to media. Sometimes there are many things that are being done, but it's not documented, it's not shared. So it's just limit in some space, and if there is it's a good practice, it cannot just be good. It's like something in a laboratory. It has to be open. So to do that, we need to document it and help to that media can help make it available in other area, even in local language. Other things is at least to let the leaders know that women do have not only these practical needs in terms of food, but also they want to access to decision making in the household, but even in the community. I just mentioned that they produce the food, but they cannot control it. Why? It's just gender discrimination. Gender discrimination. And this gets the women again in very secondary position. So trying to address this is important even during the campaign. So the campaign will be designed not only to say there are solutions, alternative, sustainable alternative solution to AGRA. And AGRA is going to just get people down more than they are before. We all agree we need to make food available, to make it accessible to everybody. But we need to preserve our environment and to protect it for the future generation. If we eat everything today, tomorrow, what will we say to our children or grandchildren? So thank you. I'm sorry it's difficult.
So thank you very much, Fatu, for that. I want to extend one other thanks to Alan Paulson, who helped to bring Fatu here for a funders conference that just happened and to connect the Community Alliance for Global Justice. And I understand that Fatu was trying to save her voice for tonight, so that she didn't even speak to the funders. Steve spoke for her. So she wants to connect to our community so much that she chose to do that. Thank you.
So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I know it wasn't actually on the agenda, and then Marcia kind of pulled me up with Heather. So
this morning.
Well, anyway, it was really great to be able to meet Fatu this weekend, and Marcia and Alan and Leslie and now the Community Alliance for Global Justice. Just have a lot of respect for the work that everybody here is doing, and a real appreciation for how important it is to have a group here in Seattle that's speaking up on these issues and doing the Agra Watch in addition to the other work that the Community Alliance for Global Justice has been about. So it's a real privilege and an honor. And Grassroots International, where I work, is a small organization that provides some funding and then does advocacy with groups in the U.S., the funding primarily to the Global South, but we were glad to be able to do a small grant for the Community Alliance for Global Justice a couple years ago. So, so it's a treat. And I wanted to also point out Soya Jiang is one of our board members who lives here in Seattle. So she's a great resource that I also met today. So lots of meeting. there's basically just two things I wanted to talk about briefly, because I think Fatou and Marcia have the most to share on this topic. But Grassroots is part of the We Are the Solution initiative and campaign, along with Fatou's group, the 12 women-led farmer organizations, as well as ROPA, which she mentioned, the Newfield Foundation, who along with Alan, really took leadership in bringing Fatou here, as well as the Swift Foundation, Food First, and the Christensen Family Fund. So just want to recognize that it really is a collaborative, and we've been really happy to be able to be part of it. And Grassroots doesn't fund that much in Africa, but this is a collaborative that really stands out because it's led by the family farmers, it's led by women family farmers, and is, talking about both what a problem is, but also, as in the name, what the solution is. And it's really inspiring to us to see that work. It's happening on a local scale, on a kind of very grounded way, but it has an enormous impact that we can see that happens not only in Burkina Faso and Mali and the countries where the groups are working, but globally for other farmer organizations and people who are affected by the negative impacts of green revolution. To be able to see a group that's standing up to that is enormously powerful. So I really, really appreciate that. I wanted to give a little bit of background on the concept of food sovereignty, which Fatou mentioned. And this is a concept that is relatively new. Are you going to do the raise your hand thing? Yeah? Yeah.
Wait, should I do that now? Okay, I had this little exercise I did this morning, and it will set the stage nicely for Sara to explain more about food sovereignty. So it also shakes things up a bit. So food sovereignty is a term we don't use very much in the United States. It's used internationally quite a bit, and as Fatou described in the work that's going on there of farmers reclaiming their rights. So just to start off, I wanted to ask people for a show of hands of who has used the term food sovereignty in conversation in the last month or so. So this, a lot more than this morning, I have to say, than the global donors meeting this morning. That's great. Food justice and food democracy are related terms that we tend to use more in this country. And so who has used or heard even the term food justice or food democracy in the past? So yeah, that's more commonly the language that we're using, and they're very related. So my next question is, who has ever planted anything? And please stand up if you have ever planted anything in your life. In grade school, the pea that my son just planted and so on. So that's fantastic. And you don't have, wait, we're not done. You have to stay standing up. Okay, the next question is to stay standing up unless any of the following three things have happened. So stay standing up unless when you were planting that plant, you had to get permission from a male relative to plant it. The second thing is if you were sued by Monsanto afterwards for having saved some of your seed and given it to your mother-in-law. So hopefully we're not losing anyone yet. And then third question, still stay standing up unless you woke up one morning and found out that your mayor or a city council person had sold the entire use rights of your land and your home and your garden to a transnational corporation for the next 100 years, and you're off the land. So I'm glad that we haven't lost anyone. You can now sit down, and thanks for indulging me. And to me, that's just sort of this exercise I do to help us think about what food sovereignty means to people around the world who don't have those rights. And so it's essentially about reclaiming rights to your land, to be able to plant things to nourish your family in the ways that you choose that are healthy for your families and also that sustain the planet. So in a nutshell. And now I'll pass it back to Sara.
So I really like that activity. And yeah, the basic idea of food sovereignty is that people have the right to food and control over their own food systems, access to and control over their food systems. And it really is kind of differentiated from a more commonly known concept of food security. So how many people have heard of food security? Yeah. So that basic idea of food security, anybody want to say? Can just yell it out. got some shy people. What I've heard about food security is that it's about making sure that people have enough calories to survive. That, you know, do people have enough food to kind of sustain their bodies? And not about, is that food the kind of food they would like, not about who produced the food, what were the conditions under which it was produced, how much were people able to be part of making decisions about that. So food sovereignty is in juxtaposition to that. Not that food security is not important, but peasant movements started saying back in 1996, an international network of peasants called La Via Campesina started saying that it's really important for us to go beyond just thinking about how many calories our bodies need, right, and how many calories different bodies need, because calories could come from anywhere. So that could be, you know, U.S. giving food aid shipments to all the poor, starving Africans, which I say as an African myself from Ethiopia. So I have a particular sensitivity to that. And, you know, the idea of food sovereignty is to say, you know what, we want to grow it ourselves. We want to be able to control how it's grown. We want to be able to think about, is the food culturally appropriate? And we think that that's critical to our well-being, not just to our physical needs and survival, partially about that, but to our well-being as a community. And so that was a concept that Via Campesina really started promoting from 1996, and that at the Nieleni Forum on Food Sovereignty that Fatou mentioned started becoming more and more both understood and well known in a broader sense in 2007 in Mali. So we're seeing that, you know, a lot of these concepts and ideas are coming from Africans, are coming from peasants and small farmers from around the world. And so I really appreciate the We Are the Solution campaign for lifting that up and showing how this works on the ground. So I'll stop there. And thank you.
Thank you. Okay, nice, thank you. Okay, I don't know, is this going to stretch so I can do my slides? I can, I think I can do it, but I just have to. Well, this is great to have had the preceding conversations from Fatou and Sarah. It really helps us understand what's happening on the ground in Africa, and also helps us to think about what's happening on the ground here and our role in part of the global food system. So I wanted to start with just some opening comments that puts it in the context of the global food system. As many of you, since you are very well informed and educated audience, will be aware of some of these things, but I wanted to point out, first of all, that our global food system is really coming apart. It's in pieces. Global trade, ownership, and investment rules that are in place have really enabled transnational agribusinesses to consolidate their holdings over productive resources, over land, seeds, and water. And at the same time, I think in this country we're becoming quite aware that the unprecedented pace of corporate consolidation in the food and agriculture sectors, you know, where we have just one or two companies controlling food retail or seeds or, you know, the dairy production or hogs or cattle, all of that. This has happened over the last 10 years, and this has led to a massive concentration of control in the hands of just a few corporate actors. That affects farming in this country, it affects us as consumers and farmers, and it affects people all around the world. And so in the midst of all of this, and I would say directly related to it, we have nearly 1 billion people who are hungry in the world, and 1 billion people who do not have access to clean water. And this is not because there's not enough food in the world. You know, you've been hearing the arguments and presentations about that, and Fatou made this point. But because, and there is plenty of food. In fact, there's double the food that is actually consumed in the world. Half of it is lost to waste and other uses. So there's enough food in the world to feed everybody, but it's an issue of access to food and control. And basically, people cannot afford the price of food. It's because they are poor, because the price of food is high, or it's going up and down, and when it goes up, people who are on the brink fall into this category of hunger and malnourishment. And so on top of all of this, climate change is happening. We're very aware of it. I think this group is probably quite aware of it, and it's having enormous impacts on food production around the world, and that's disproportionately affecting the poorest people in the poorest countries, and especially women. And as Fatou was making that quite clear, women bear the burden. Women are sort of the mainstay of food production in most countries around the world, and yet women bear the heaviest burden. Women-headed households tend to be the most food insecure, and within households, women have the least access to food and the highest levels of hunger. And it's this real lack of access to resources that we are seeing. Right now, women globally own only about 2% of the land and get about 10%, no, I think it's 5% actually, of agricultural extension services, and only 10% of international donor funding is directed towards women. And yet, as in sub-Saharan Africa, women are 80 to 90% of the farmers. So there's something really askew here in where resources go. And at the same time, so women are most of the farmers of the world, and women also have an incredible knowledge, and familiarity and knowledge of the local ecology, of local seeds, of what grows best under what conditions, and really have the ability to feed the world, but are not, but because of these inequities in our system are really deprived of having that capacity to act on it. So what I'm going to talk about today, kind of my main message, which is a little different than this morning, but is that women are key to solving global hunger and climate crises. And I'll talk a little bit about how. There are two kind of main areas I'll discuss. One is that the sort of technological aspect, and understanding technologies is very important. And the other is the political side, that politics and institutions really matter as well. So I'm also going to share with you a few of the findings from this UN-sponsored International Assessment of Agriculture. This is a massive, it's like the most comprehensive, rigorous report of agriculture to have ever taken place. It's sort of the equivalent of the IPCC for climate. This is the IPCC for agriculture, in a sense. It took place over 4 to 5 years, 6 to 7, depending on when you count. I was in the early consultative process, so for me it was sort of a 7-year slog. But 400 authors from over 80 countries participated. These were scientists and development experts who got together and reviewed all the available evidence looking at the impacts of agricultural knowledge, science, and technology on equitable and sustainable development. And the main banner heading from this report is that business as usual is not an option. What we've been doing in the past is not going to work given the challenges we're facing ahead, particularly with climate change and water scarcity and the sort of burgeoning food crisis. It looked at conventional agriculture and concluded that while we have seen significant yield gains in the second half of the 20th century from our approach to agriculture, this green revolution and the use of chemical pesticides and improved seeds, those yield gains have not been sustained. They're declining as we've worn out our soil and depleted our ecosystems and all of that. And they've come, as you are well aware, with enormous costs to the environment and to health, to social equity, and to human rights. And these costs are just not tolerable or acceptable. They also found that this kind of agriculture that we've been using and we've been exporting around the world is extremely water and energy intensive. These are costs that also we just can't afford given what lies ahead. So I'm sure you're well aware of the issues with pesticides, so I won't get into that. But in terms of climate change, I just wanted to note that this kind of industrial agriculture model is responsible for a great deal of greenhouse gas emissions. And agriculture, kind of at large, has been estimated by the IPCC, the Panel on Climate Change, to be 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. And that's when you include the land use changes that are driven by trade and commercial interests that are generally things like clear-cutting the Amazon in order to put in genetically engineered soybeans in Brazil, or cutting down trees in Indonesia to put in palm oil plantations. So when you include this and the heavy reliance on fossil fuels that goes into the production, use, and distribution of chemical inputs, petrochemicals, you come up with this massive amount of 1/3 of greenhouse gas emissions. So, I mean, that's the bad news, but the good news is that agriculture also has the potential to really be a part of the solution if we change what we've been doing and move to another approach, which I'll get to in just a moment. This was a slide I just wanted to add to the point of food production and this question of, well, how will we feed the world? Our biggest resource here is reducing waste. And as I said before, we produce an enormous amount of food, and fully 50% of that is thrown away in the US. The figure in India is about 40% that is lost to rotting or damage along the way, sort of all along the food chain. And in the US, we often like to think that, some in the US like to think, well, we feed the world, this big commercial industrial agriculture is necessary to feed the world. Well, there are two things I'd say to that, and one is that we don't feed the world. We feed livestock that are being produced in CAFOs, in concentrated animal feeding operations. And we feed our cars increasingly with corn grown for ethanol. So we're not feeding the world here, certainly. On the other hand, 70% of global agricultural production is by small-scale farmers. So it's the small-scale farmers that are feeding the world. Before I move on to the alternative kind of paradigm approach, there's a question many people ask about, what about biotechnology? Is this, and there's, here we are in Seattle, the home of Gates Foundation. Is this the solution, as we hear time and again from those who are working away developing new seeds? So the ISTAD, that's sort of the acronym nickname for the agricultural assessment, looked closely at biotechnology. And in fact, it includes, the definition includes a whole suite of technologies from natural breeding, and even agroecology fits within this big definition. But the ISTAD did look specifically at GMOs, at genetically modified organisms, and found that it was very interesting because the findings from this whole review was that, well, it's an interesting innovation, interesting stuff going on there in the lab, and there may be something good that comes of it. So it wasn't a flat out, never, ever, we don't want this on the face of the earth. It was like, kind of interesting. But remember, we're looking at how, our assessment is how can we contribute to equitable and sustainable development. And when we get out of the lab and the box and sort of chasing after other goals that may serve other interests, when it comes to reducing hunger and poverty, the findings were the empirical evidence just doesn't support an argument that says this has given us a contribution towards reducing hunger and poverty. So in a world of limited resources, why would one put more resources into something that's not really going to advance these goals? It might advance other commercial interests, and it certainly does, but we need to keep our eyes on the prize of what we're working towards. The evidence also came forward that GMOs do not increase yields. They're highly variable yields that come out with GMOs, and often when a new GM seed comes out that does have an increased yield, it's not because of the genetic engineering. It's because, and there are case after case in the US where the corporation, Monsanto, has acquired the best yielding variety that was bred through conventional means and was available on the, in the public sphere, has obtained that seed, inserted its own genes for for herbicide tolerance, so to be used with weed killers, and then brought it back out on the market, but with multiple technology fees and patent fees stacked on top. And well, it has higher yield but that didn't have anything to do with the engineering. And what's more, that seed is no longer available in the public domain. And so if farmers want that nice seed, I've had farmers from Iowa say, I just wanted that seed, but now Monsanto's got it, and next year it's coming back in a transgenic form, and it's going to cost 2 or 3 times the amount. So that's some of what is behind the whole kind of our seeds yield better, and they don't. And around the climate ready, often I've seen these ads, you probably have as well, with Monsanto taking them out saying, oh, climate change, population, we're going to have the newest, latest, greatest climate ready seeds. Well, this is a myth. And the reason is actually that despite 25 years of research, no climate-ready, drought-tolerant, salt-tolerant transgenic seeds have been brought to market. And that's simply because things like drought tolerance come from a very complex interaction of biotic and abiotic factors. And it depends upon the geography and the landscape and a number of things interacting with the whole plant itself. So it's not something that can be engineered with a single gene. Conventional breeding can find plants that are a little more drought tolerant. Participatory plant breeding is actually the best approach as far as a breeding solution, because that involves farmers as scientists working together with other breeders to come up with varieties that do perform better. But in terms of climate resilience, breeding itself isn't really going to bring us that answer, because what we need with variable conditions, where you've got drought this month and then extreme rains and flooding the next month, is much more complex, building in ecological resilience to the farming system. So you need farm-level adaptations, landscape, even watershed-level adaptations. Again, you can't accomplish that with a single-gene approach. And there are also, as you are, I'm sure, aware of massive social equity concerns that come along with the GMOs. Intellectual property frameworks criminalize farmers for saving seed, while transferring those benefits to the patent holders, the corporations that are reaping millions of dollars in profits. So these were all concerns. Oh gosh, I haven't been backed up. These are all concerns that the ISTAT identified in its scientific review, and are part of the reason why it's like, well, there are so many concerns there, it's really not leading us towards where we want to go. This I just wanted to throw up there to give a sense of how the seed sector has concentrated. So there used to be a gazillion seed companies, and over the past 10, 12 years, at the time this was made by Phil Howard, you can see the concentration that was occurring, where Monsanto actually now owns all these other ones. So that gives us a sense of what we're dealing with. And just a final point on the concentration issue. So Monsanto talks about these climate-ready genes and bringing the solution, but Monsanto, as well as 4 or 5 of the other big biotech seed companies, in the last several years quietly took out patents, over 500 patents on what they're calling climate genes. So, this is not, they're not doing this for, even if they come up with some kind of magic silver bullet, which I doubt that they will, it's not in the service of farmers. They've already patented all these genes, which have been in the public domain. So that's also a problem. Okay, the findings of the assessment, which say that business as usual is not an option, and we really need to move towards agroecological production, which is what I'll get to in the second part of my talk, have been confirmed by a number of reports. It just seems like every day I turn around, there's a new fantastic report by scientists, but well documented and referenced, that have been coming out. So the last 3, just in the last couple months, the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to food came out with a report on agroecology and the right to food, pointing out that agroecological farming can double food production, and is really the way towards fulfilling our obligations to fulfilling people's right to food. The UN FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization, came out with a report recently on what they called climate smart agriculture, which does not notably include an emphasis on biotech, but again is going back to building ecological resilience, and so on with these other reports. The last one came out a few years ago, but is very important in that it specifically looked at Africa and organic agriculture, and came to the conclusion that organic farming is quite possibly the most robust way towards addressing food security in Africa. Okay, this, I'm not really going to get into it, but I just wanted to point out that the ISTAT addressed a whole range of changes that we need to do in order to move ahead. And so that ranged from really supporting small-scale farmers and their ability to organize in collectives and support women's groups in organizing for power. I will speak more about the agroecological farming, but it also addressed all these other political institutional issues of we need to rebalance power in the food system, we need more equitable trade systems, we need to look at ownership and improve governance, and so on. So I think I'll move rather quickly then through the agroecology, and I just wanted to explain what it is. And agroecology is simply the the design and management of agricultural systems based on cutting-edge, really state-of-the-art agroecological science, or ecological science, integrated with local and indigenous knowledge. And this is just a picture I wanted to put up. I'll briefly mention Consolata James. She is a farmer in Kenya, a maize farmer, a corn farmer, and like many corn farmers, she's dealing with soil fertility, pest, and weed problems. But rather than pour chemical pesticides on her field and buy expensive chemical fertilizers that will burn her soil, she's chosen the ecological path. This is the push-pull system where she's intercropped. In the middle there, a ground cover, a desmodium plant, which fixes nitrogen, but also emits a scent that repels, pushes, as a push part, repels the insects out of the field. They just don't like the smell of the desmodium. They get out of there, and then they're attracted to the grasses that she plants around the perimeter. So they land in the grasses, they lay their eggs, and when the eggs hatch out into larvae, they get stuck in the sticky fibers of the grasses, and so they die there. Some of the other grasses also provide a safe habitat for parasitic wasps. So any that survive the sticky morass of the one grass get zapped by the parasitic wasps. And so with this system, she has doubled her food production without use of any kind of chemical inputs. She's also got all this grass that she cuts and provides as fodder to her animals. So she's been getting an increased milk supply that she feeds to her children, and the rest she sells to the market. So she's got income benefits, ecological benefits, health benefits, no more poisonings in her family, and also benefits that go far beyond the farm that have to do with climate change. These kinds of practices that increase soil organic matter and the complexity of soil structure are a way of capturing atmospheric carbon and sequestering it, capturing it down in the soil. So you have reduced carbon dioxide emissions, you have reduced nitrous oxide because of more efficient nitrogen cycling. And also importantly for her and other farmers, besides the mitigating effects, there's a great increased adaptiveness. Because of the complexity of her farm, it's more resilient, and again, the soil organic matter, soil is really key here, and that enables the soil organic matter holds water and moisture better in the soil, which works under both drought and flood conditions. So again, that's kind of a difference with the transgenic approach, where you've got one thing that will perform under, the drought that you have this month, but next month you're out of luck. This is just summarizing the words of the President of the UN General Assembly, Miguel Descoto, who spoke there about the ISTUD's findings, calling for this redirection of investment and policy support towards agroecology. And I just want to add that you may not have heard of this report before because it wasn't hardly at all covered in the US media. It came out in 2008, and it was approved in an intergovernmental plenary where I participated in South Africa, in Johannesburg. And at that final plenary, all these government delegates reviewed the summary documents, and I brought a couple there to show. All the Europeans agreed, all the African delegates, government delegates, we're talking, all the Latin Americans, all the Asian government delegates approved these findings. And there are only 3 countries that declined to approve, and I'll let you guess. Shout out, who do you think wouldn't approve this report? The United States, yes. Australia, Canada, right. And England took their time. They had to think about it for like 3 more months. Britain. But so US, Australia, and Canada did not approve it. They said they welcomed it, and it was interesting. But mainly their reservations, the reasons they wouldn't, were because they felt that the section on biotechnology didn't sufficiently appreciate the value of these products and technologies, meaning the GMOs, and they didn't appreciate the critique of trade liberalization or unregulated trade. Okay, so just in my last couple minutes, I did want to say one more thing about the agroecology, because it has to do with the democratization of science and technology. And this process really puts scientific inquiry and decision-making back in the hands of farmers. So again, kind of the polar opposite of the industrial, conventional, externally designed system. And as Fatou said, farmers are researchers, and farmers are scientists as well. And farmers can work with those who are formally trained with additional skills in experimental design to really be able to draw more extensive conclusions, building on their local knowledge. And this scientific process that engages farmers very actively using their own knowledge and experience also facilitates the political empowerment of farmers. And it's very important, especially with women farmers who engage in this. And I had my own experience working in Indonesia many years ago with Indonesian women who were we were studying the ecology of the rice system. And after some months of this and gaining what I would call ecological literacy, even if their reading literacy was low, they became extremely ecologically literate. Then they got together as a group and they traveled all the way to Jakarta and met with World Bank officials who were implementing this big development project in Borneo. And they said, well, we want you to stop sending all these chemical pesticides and these hybrid coconut varieties. We've looked at the ecological system and we want to gain more strength and training in agroecology. We want to be able to continue using our native local varieties of coconuts in systems that we were already using before you guys came in, and that included plants that had medicinal value and food values and bananas and so on. And so what was really striking was that at the start of this process, the women who were involved in it were very shy and didn't even want to speak in a group in front of other farmers, even in front of their neighbors. They said, oh, this isn't really for us. But by the end of this, they had gained such confidence that they went and spoke to World Bank officials and said, this is what we want, and we're taking charge of our destiny, as it were. So this is just another example, because the kinds of great small-scale ecological practices like what Consolata James is doing, and there are thousands all over the world going on right now. For these to really be scaled up or sort of spread widely, we need to remove the constraints, which are largely political. And this can happen at the local level and the global level. So this one little example I want to share with you now, if I still have a minute or two, okay, is the work of the Tamil Nadu Women's Collective in India. And so these women got together in late 90s and organized initially around ending violence against women in their communities. So they were training women, providing safe shelters and other opportunities, and really bringing this conversation forward about the harm that violence against women is doing in the community, talking with men about it as well. And their role, they had these three principles. One was to empower women as decision makers in the household as well as in the community. So then they moved on to making use of a law in India that says 1/3 of local offices must be held by women. So they began running women for office. And in 1996, they ran 200 women, about 102, one office. 10 years later, they ran 900 candidates and 400 women won. And of these 478 were elected president of their panchayat, which is the local government. So from these positions of influence in the community and the respect that was accorded them, and men were voting for them as well, they were able to engage their communities in discussions around natural resource management, what they wanted to do with the river and the sand and other things, and how they wanted to grow agriculture. So this was food sovereignty in practice, where the women were saying, all right, now let's make some decisions together. And then that led them to their kind of final principle, where they looked around at what was going on and they decided to formally embrace agroecology as the approach to agriculture that was going to best meet their needs. And this, in Sara's presentation this morning, she also spoke about other national movements, like the Landless Peoples Movement, the MST in Brazil, and how they have adopted agroecology. And we're increasingly seeing from the local to the national on up to the global level. And this is just the second part about how institutions and politics really matter. And some of these rules that we have in place are really constraining progress. They're perpetuating hunger and poverty and justice, which is why we need both the work at the local level and the global social movements that can tackle some of these big global rules. This is a picture of La Via Campesina. It's a worldwide movement of peasant farmers and fishers. And La Via Campesina works both on the ground, grassroots. I don't know how many million did you see? or 150 million in 70 countries. And what's also really amazing about La Via Campesina is that they also engage in these global international forums. So they go to Cancun, they participate in the WTO, they participate in the climate change talks, in the talks around indigenous rights and biodiversity. And what's really important about their presence there is, of course, what's most important is that they are giving the farmers' voices being heard, but it also really does change the power dynamic and bring concrete outcomes. It's not like just going and saying your piece and then being ignored by everybody. I mean, many governments still try to ignore them, but what I've seen is that when they speak, that also opens up the policy space for southern governments that are, being bullied by the U.S. during the coffee breaks continuously. So it opens up the policy space for them these southern government delegates to say, well, yes, I actually, agree with that comment, or I disagree with what the U.S. delegate just said. And then that begins, you start to see this groundswell coming of southern governments standing up, kind of bolstered. Some are unwilling to be bolstered by La Via Campesina, but this does open important opportunities. I've got some resources out there, so I'm just going to conclude then with saying, leaving you with maybe 3 things that you can do. So one is to learn more. I mean, I think you're all very, very well informed, but you can learn more by going to, I've got some of these links there, resources, talking to other organizations that work on these issues. You've got the Community Alliance for Global Justice here, a great source of information. Share. I would suggest that you just get together over coffee with a few friends and talk about some of these things, because one of the most one of the biggest constraints we have to change in this country is this pervasive myth that we need big commercial industrial agriculture to feed the world, and we don't talk enough about it in this country, that there are alternatives both here and globally. So getting together and even just beginning to explore this more, finding ways to talk to farmers in the surrounding area, organic farmers or conventional, and understanding, how our food system is structured. Having those conversations is a great thing. And then the third thing I would just say is speak out, make your voice heard, call or write to your senator or your congressperson and urge them to ensure that any foreign aid or development assistance that we are putting forward goes towards, explicitly prioritizes agroecological farming and is not going towards more of the same tired old solutions that have got us into this problem. And also make sure that that any aid that we are giving is based on the priorities and the consent and the voice and leadership of those rural communities, of indigenous people, of women, most importantly, and small-scale farmers around the world. So I will end with that, and it looks like we've got some questions.
In a minute, I'll take some questions, and we have one that was earlier over here and a couple around the room, and then after that, Heather will come up and talk a little bit more about CAGJ. I just want to make 3 quick points. One is an appreciation of what Fatou was saying about the need for farmers' research. It's been a struggle in the United States, too, to get farmers' voices into the research institutions, and it's considered an innovation to have a SARE program, a Sustainable Agriculture Research and Extension program that supports on-farm participation in research here, and it's still slanted towards the universities, so we have to really support that. Community Alliance for Global Justice has also really been concerned with issues around gender analysis of what the Gates Foundation is doing, and my partner, ex-co-chair, not my partner, but my ex-co-chair in AgriWatch, Ashley Fenton, and myself just presented a paper on an analysis of the gender impact of the Gates Foundation, which we're happy to share with people. And we want to make some more connections with Fatou and other women's groups on the ground to talk about the real impacts and to share information. And the second thing is around biotechnology. The other piece that isn't often talked about is that the biotechnology actually doesn't work. It doesn't work in terms of yields decreasing, as you were saying, But the plants actually know when there's foreign DNA in them. I was just talking to Michael Hansen from the Consumers Union when I was back in New York earlier this week, and he was talking about a GMO sorghum that was genetically engineered, I think for drought resistance, but I'm not sure. And they worked on it for 7 years, and were about to bring it to market, and then the gene stopped working. Okay, and the plant, the mechanisms aren't clear, but it looks like the plant excised the foreign DNA from. So the plants are smarter than we are. And I think that's really important for us to look at, which isn't to say that all GMO technology doesn't work in some way, but we really have to look very carefully at the claims of the companies and not give that ground to them. We've had failures in rice. We had contamination of rice in this country, some record settlement of, I think, $170 million against companies that were doing GMO test plots in the United States. That just was one. And we know about the failure of cotton and other crops, both in the United States and in India. So we have to really not seed the ground and say, oh, well, they've got the science. They don't. In all the ways that Marcia was talking about, and also our indigenous people knowledge that we're talking about. So that's the second point. And then the third piece on the Gates Foundation, what Marcia was just talking about, it wasn't a market solution that those women, it was a political solution that those women were undertaking, and that's part of the work of empowerment that Fatou was talking about as well. We need to have more access to markets, to regional markets, and so on. But the Gates Foundation's approach is market, technology, and dollars, okay? And it doesn't include the thinking about empowerment of women, although they'll talk about it a lot on their website when you actually get down to looking at what they're doing. We claim that that's not the case. Just one case in point, two things I'll say. One is we were shocked when we heard the Gates Foundation talk about land mobility as a key issue for them. So what is land mobility, do you think? It relates to... Right. That's right. In other words, privatization of land which has been held in common, which we haven't talked about as much. Fatou mentioned land grabs is a whole issue. If Africa can't feed itself, why is most of the world looking to take the land from Africa to do agricultural production in the most fertile areas? So that's one example of, again, the Gates Foundation not really looking at what's really important. It isn't land mobility, but women's access to land. And as Via Campesina defines food sovereignty these days, it's the absence of violence against women. And that's a really key point that we need to keep coming back to. The second example that really was shocking to me that came out of the Gates Foundation at a meeting that I was at, it was a public meeting, they talked about the need for food security in Ethiopia. And what was needed was granaries. Now, anybody who knows the history of Ethiopia, there were granaries for thousands of years, not just in Ethiopia, but in the Horn of Africa and so on. And it was the IMF and World Bank policies and USAID policies that forced Ethiopia to sell its granaries and let the granaries go into disrepair. The Gates Foundation comes along 5 years later and say, we have a solution. We'll have private granaries, blah, 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 which feeds into the speculation and the global insecurity of food. I don't have time to detail all of that, but we've been talking a lot about the politics of need, that the Gates Foundation, USAID, and the whole development industry is exploiting climate change, supposed lack of food in the world, and so on, to push an agenda that got started 20, 30, 40 years ago with what we call the neoliberal agenda. And so that's one of the reasons why AgriWatch is a really key program of the Community Alliance for Global Justice, because we've been taking on the way that the US government and Western governments in general have been thinking about what's good for the world, which is market, technology, and dollars, just like the Gates Foundation. And if you look at the relationship between the Gates Foundation and Monsanto, which we don't have time to talk about, you can talk to Travis English, who did some great research in Kenya about the relationship between Monsanto and other biotech companies and Agra. And if you look at some of the press releases that we've done that talk about, and other people have done about the relationships between Monsanto and the Gates Foundation, you'll see that there's real ties between the way the Gates Foundation thinks about what's important and the corporate agenda. So that's the other piece that I want to just highlight for a minute. And let's move into questions for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then Heather, you can come up. So did you still want to ask your question? Okay, you can do it in private. Yeah.
Well, I've got one for Marcy and one for you, so I can trade.
Well, why don't you just do one, and we'll see what other questions come up. Okay. And stand up and speak out if you want. Yeah, why don't you come on up? Yeah, come on up. It makes it easier for people to hear you.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Well, I'll look at you, not at Martin, otherwise I'll blow her away. No, you struck, I've got several really pointed questions rather than speaking to the choir. One is that I've been picking up more and more about not just are we in the mind of the public the idea that we need high-tech ag to feed the world via Gates and all the rest, but that there's such major investments by countries like China who can't feed themselves with all the industry that they've massed, and that the third world, the underdeveloped countries or whatever, are free game for industrial ag to feed urban cities in the Western powers. Is that true? Wasn't one of the major incentives to move into Africa, especially by countries like China, to capture resources that they need because they will not be able to feed the Chinese people in China? Yeah. Is that correct? And could you elaborate on it?
Okay, yeah, I mean, I haven't looked as closely at sort of from the angle of the motivations of China and Saudi Arabia, which are sort of some of the biggest countries. But I would say that, yeah, they are having made the choices that they have, or in Saudi Arabia, the resource issues that are affecting them in the context of all of this global trade and so on, is a motivating factor in why they're going to Africa and buying up all of this land and kicking people, real estate, in order to grow food that they will take back, export back, export back to their home countries. So that kind of, I think, speaks to the broader dysfunction of the industrial and the global food system, that with such a kind of twisting of resources, we're now, it's clear that the rest of the world hasn't been able to feed itself with this model, and so now we're going after the one place where actually there is such wealth, I would say, of resources and knowledge and natural resources, being Africa, saying, okay, we've got to, go after that last resource and use the African land to feed ourselves. So it's sort of the height of irony that, having come full circle from saying, oh, Africans can't feed themselves, it's like, oh, now we really need Africa, but we need it for ourselves. It's kind of the extension of the whole colonial imperialist, historical path that we've seen. And I think Sara wants.
Just one thing to add to that. So there's a connection to free trade policies that we've actually been learning about. So there's a U.S.-Korea free trade agreement that you all might be working on, yes, opposing. But the Korean Peasant League, which is part of La Via Campesina, has actually been talking about this very fact. So if the U.S.-Korea free trade agreement goes through and Korean peasants are less able to produce food for their own population, they believe that South Korean corporations are going to be increasing their land grab. So not the people of Korea, not the peasants of Korea, but the corporations will see an opportunity, because they'll understand that with climate change, if the peasants aren't able to produce the food because of free trade, then there's going to be a more of a demand and a need for the food to feed Korea. So, one idea is, let's not do this free trade agreement so that Korea can feed itself.
I think the whole issue of land grabbing is based on the fact that production that is advanced to say we want the land because we will give employment to people in the country and also produce enough to the country. We have seen some of the part in Central Africa where the rice produce is directly sent out to that country. And the local market doesn't have that rice at all. But to start, they say it's because we want to give employment to the people. So what will happen is the farmers who have been expelled from their land start complaining because they don't get the employment, but they even don't access to the food produced on their land.
Just one piece I wanted to add to that is I think also that it's when the transnational corporations are buying this, they're not doing this with the idea of like, oh, we need to feed the people back home, but it's an investment, and they're aware, you know, with the kind of the climate change, the climate crises we're facing, and water scarcity, that food is going to have, you know, increasing as a commodity, something that you can invest in and be able to sell when the price, you know, when the commodity goes up, or, you know, use it in the in the market in the speculative sense, the way investors are investing and speculating around around commodities. So if you're a transnational corporation, this could be a very lucrative investment to make. They're getting these 100-year leases, so you know they're looking at ways in which to make a killing, as it were, from that.
And I'll just suggest that while Africa's being portrayed as poor, it's really rich. It's wealthy in land and water, and indigenous knowledge of seeds and market. So the Gates Foundation at the World Economic Forum just released a big set of white papers, and one of them, they funded it anyway, was from the consumer corporations of the world or something like that. That's not the right name, but it sounds innocuous, but it's Conagra, Coca-Cola, all the worst food companies. And basically they're saying Africa's a market, and that those companies ought to invest not just for commodity purposes here, but for cheap food in Africa. And so, again, it's this idea that Africa is free reign for anything. And the seed, as our colleague Carol Thompson often talks about, is so key to Africa as well as to all indigenous farmers and people on the land. And that's the other piece that the Gates Foundation is part of enclosing, if you will. So is there we have time for one more question, and then come on up. Or stand up anyway. Yeah, you got to come up.
First of all, I want to say I think language is powerful, and so I'm going to encourage us not to call people peasants. That just, they're people who farm or whatever they do. Peasants has a negative connotation for me anyway. So I've asked this question at some of their meetings before, and I've never gotten a satisfactory answer. And I hope I get it tonight. Bill Gates has almost as much money as anybody I know. So he could not possibly be doing this to get more money. What's his motivation for getting in bed with the devil called Monsanto?
I'll do my best. I actually don't think intentions are as important as impact in my own analysis. And so I don't necessarily often think about what Bill Gates has to gain. I do know that he's interested in leaving a name for himself. I do know that he believes in technology. He thinks he's helping the world. And the way that he built his company was on technology and dollars and market. And so that's the way he thinks the world should work. And he's been interested in biotechnology since way before there was a foundation. He was, through Microsoft, they were working with UW on supporting the technology part. So I think that they really want to do the right thing. It's not like they're the evil empire, but they believe that corporations and private investment in what used to be public sector things like agricultural extension, like plant breeding, like market development, should all be in the private sector. Philanthrocapitalism is another name for it, and we can talk about that a lot. There's an interesting man who used to be at the Ford Foundation, Michael Edwards, who wrote an interesting book about basically the emperor has new clothes. And so I think his motivation really is, he thinks he's doing the best he can for the world. It's not like he's sitting back there plotting, ha ha ha, we're going to make more money. But he keeps thinking that investing in these kinds of technology and financial instruments are the way to advance the world. Do you want to say any more?
No,
Okay.
Do you want to comment on the peasant thing? That
Yeah,
would-
go for it.
So, and Sada might have working closely with global social movement. So I really appreciate your bringing forward this issue of language, because it is so important that we think and use terms that really reflect the heart and meaning of what we are about. And I understand that especially in this country, and for some folks, as you said, for you, peasant has a negative connotation, and so that's something to be aware of. For La Via Campesina, this worldwide movement of peasant farmers, they use that term very deliberately and intentionally as a political, for them, the term peasant is a kind of a claiming of pride and of heritage. And so, they is sort of positioned as opposed to, like commercial, perhaps the way Gates would consider it as like these are, capital actors in a capitalist system who are engaging in this process, but it has more of a cultural and spirit-based and political basis for using the term. And maybe Sada would you have something to add? Okay, yeah, just to that. Oh, and just okay, go ahead. It's okay.
We could talk for a long, long time, and I want to give Heather a chance to say some more things. I want to say that there's a part of that land mobility story that I was telling about. They actually said so that people can sell their land and move to the city, as if we need more people in Nairobi or any of the mega cities, right? And when we think about people being pushed out of the core of the city to the suburbs and pushed off the land and to the edge of the land, people are actually having a narrower, a smaller and smaller space in which to exist. So the other piece of that is to go from being producer to being consumer. Right, the examples that Fatu was raising all the time was of women taking care of their families, being resilient in times of low possibilities for food production. And the Gates Foundation is emphasizing efficiency. Some people heard the talk that the Gates Foundation did yesterday at this conference, and they were talking about evaluating programs. And I wasn't there, but I heard one of the big pieces was on production efficiency and yield, so-called yield, which doesn't look at what happens when there's a really bad drought. How do people, in a resilient way, survive? And so we have to stop thinking about just efficiency or production in terms of numbers of, tons of food being produced, but how do people actually survive? And that's going to be a key issue for everybody facing climate change, including the folks in the U.S.